far further back than that. And by the same token, so are your organizations, right? So it's something we're just on the cusp of. I'm not sure I have a really great answer for it. I know we're seeing it, like, just give you a really basic example, we're seeing the use of deepfakes and sort of the broad adoption of that, and the ease of use of deepfakes, and how good they are and how difficult they are to detect being used, in really simple financial crimes right now, like just to access your bank account and things like that, kind of lowbrow things. But once they're able to sort of monetize and expand on this, I can see this being used like at the nation state level far more broadly, and for attacks that are far more significant than just taking the however many thousands you have in your bank account. That's not significant.
What's changed in the world of cyber attacks over the last few years obviously people know malware phishing, but it's every month it seems like they're getting more sophisticated. Like what's the latest on that? Right?
I think the biggest game changer in my view, and I started out way back in the day when ransomware wasn't a thing, the biggest game changer for ransomware and to propel this is cryptocurrency. Because in the past, when you asked for a ransom to be paid, if they could lock up your system, it was a check, it was a money order, it was going somewhere where it could be tracked. With blockchain and crypto, that was the game changer. That was the moment where criminals realized that this is enormously profitable, very little risk. They have some technology challenges to overcome, but they're not going to really go to jail for a long period of time. Somebody's probably not going to kill them for moving drugs or prostitution across the border. It's a pretty safe crime. It's incredibly profitable, and it's very low risk. So, and you look at some of the developing nations that are out there, they don't have laws that are preventing this from being a crime. So we asked to extradite a person from a sub-Saharan country. If they don't have a law, I've been told, look, they didn't break any laws in this country, so we can't give you that American or that guy that's sitting here. So it is crypto is really been a driving force in this now. But law enforcement is starting to catch up, and you're starting to see things like a year or so ago in Colonial Pipeline, where the FBI did claw back a significant amount of crypto. So they made some of the bad guys sit up and go, how did they do that? I have some ideas, but I can't share them right now.
What about you, Shereen? How do you feel about crypto and blockchain, like in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So virtual currencies, cryptocurrencies are part of sort of everyday life in fraud now. But I will say, having worked fraud at the Bureau, it's easier to trace cryptocurrency than it is cash. The worst was when people got cash out of the bank and then poof into the wind. You lose the trail immediately. At least with crypto, there is an ability to track and trace it. There is an ability to at least attempt attribution. It is not easy, I won't lie. There's a lot of anonymity. And if you're savvy at what you're doing and you're using the right networks, it's basically as bad as cash. However, at least it does leave a digital footprint. At least there is an immutable ledger that is public. And there are a lot of ways that we can use that information. And the more fraud that occurs actually using cryptocurrency, the better we get at tracing it, because we have more data points. So as we're gathering and aggregating all of these data points throughout history, we're now able to say in many cases, just by looking at where the crypto went, we can attribute it to a certain group of people. It may land in a place that we can sort of legal process on them and things like that. But ultimately, the only way to combat this is a holistic approach. Like, it takes not just defenses on the side of companies that are potential victims, right, and quick reaction when something does happen, right? But it also takes work with the financial institutions, with the various exchanges, and peer-to-peer networks, and all of these other people. And we're not quite at a seamless place yet with that cooperation. So I think that's hopefully the next step in combating the use of cryptocurrencies in various types of crimes.
Nature of the world. So Shereen, let's continue with you on that thread. So when you're looking at keeping compliance with, say, AML regulations, but also maintaining operational efficiency, how do you strike a balance between the two?
I say this with slight hesitation. I think that the government actually maybe got this one right when they came up with some AML regulations, because they contemplated the fact that not every organization is the same, not all of your risks are the same, not all of the techniques that you're going to be able to use to fight money laundering are going to be the same. So the regulations actually, they're reasonable, and they actually have reasonableness written into them. And so, the things that are required from a company, whether you like it or not just brick and mortar casinos, not just e-gaming, but also esports. Like anytime you're taking money, giving money, right, you become a financial institution according to FinCEN. You are regulated not just by the federal government, but also probably by a number of state authorities, regulatory authorities, and gaming commissions, and also we think of the DOJ and state authorities that prosecute criminal acts as well, right? So you have a lot of people looking down your throats. You actually have to abide by various AML regulations, and the approach. I mean, like I said, it's pretty reasonable. Like you need to have a system of controls. That system of controls needs to be able to monitor the activity, and it needs to be able to do that on a risk-based approach, meaning for your organization, know your risk, be able to defend them, and say this is why we implemented this system of controls. And you need to have independent monitoring, right? So that some independent body needs to come in and ensure that the system of controls that you have put in place are actually working. And that needs to be done on a fairly regular basis, annually, at least every 2 years. Right? You need to have trained your employees to know what to look for. They're your front line. They are your weakest link, and they are your strongest link in the chain. Right? Because they're the ones that see your customers or interact with your people or are looking at the data on a day-to-day basis. So train your employees to know what to look for and say, wait, this doesn't make sense, so that you know where to dig, right? And then, I mean, there are a couple other things, but I would say the other one is holistic. I mean, the government now requires you to use all information available to you in fighting money laundering. And I don't know if you guys have been following the recent, there was a guy, he ended up at Resort World, but originally he was at MGM, and he was at the Cosmo, and basically he was allowing an illegal sports betting operation to occur using the casino. And the guy ended up being like, he would literally bring duffel bags of cash to the casino. I mean, then he would get markers. I mean, it was crazy. Like when I was reading the facts of this case, I was like, that can't be right. And it was reported. It was reported by some frontline folks, people at the cashier, and some others that this was suspicious. And they never took that information into account. And one of the things that the government ended up dinging them for was not using all information available to them. So not having a cohesive ability to aggregate your different data sets and say, okay, all of these things put together are a red flag. It may not just be one, but when they come together in aggregate, they are a red flag. And once you've done all that, you need to be able to report. You must report. It's actually a requirement to report suspicious activity. And so, I think the government is actually fairly reasonable about this. I say that again with hesitation, having been in the government and understanding how it all works. But at the end of the day, at some point you're going to have to be able to defend what you've done. And if you haven't at least hit those points, you're not going to have a defensible argument. And the repercussions are fairly severe. So I think that answers the question.
Same with you, Jack. I mean, I think that one of the things we've been talking about is so much that there's so much technology out there, but I always feel like that when the water's finding the way in the hole, it's the tiny little hole, and that's the person. So talk to me a little bit about in your work when you're able to proactively get in front of it, or when you have to help mitigate on the back end, like what would be some of the advice you would give to, the group here, just in general, about how to train up the individual to be the first line of defense in the cyber world?
It really is. The customers and the employees, it's all an ecosystem here, and having those type of programs in place for to spot phishing email, to spot a human trafficking for it is really, you got to take it seriously. We talk to boards of directors all the time, and as Shireen said, the threats out there are, insider threats that employee that goes rogue on you, external bad guys in the nation states. It's also the government. They're going to come and fight hard if things aren't done to the expectations that the government wants them done. So it is really a holistic review of, we all take the ethics class every year. We talk to the employees and helping them understand why their role is so critical in doing this. And it can be, talk about from anti-money laundering to the cyber piece of it as well.
couple of things. One of the things, Kroll, we publish a report on fraud and financial crime every year, and that's kind of along the same question that 44% of identified fraud was kind of came in from a whistleblower. And so a client has a whistleblower, what's next? Something happens, in this, I know this can kind of cover everything. You find something, what would be the first 3 or 4 things that somebody should do immediately to make sure that they have this in control? We talk about reputational damage, we talk about operational inefficiency, the loss, everything that goes attendant to that. What do we do? Somebody's sounded the alarm. What's next? It can be for any type of an issue.
Having that plan in place is critical. Having those tabletop exercises. Including the board director, your legal. What happens when the FBI comes and knocks on your door? What are you going to give them? Have you even discussed that? What can you give them? What is protected? So having some type of a plan in place that is exercised, finding out where those failures are, I think that is really the start of that. We help companies work through that. Everything from putting the pieces back together, but truly, what happens when there's a crisis, and what happens when there's something going on that we've had experiences where a company was doing everything right, and the one thing they missed was the 23-year-old that was running a social media platform that basically said, "Hey, I understand our systems are down. We've been hacked. Don't worry about it. We're getting on top of it. We've been hacked. There are U.S. attorneys that read the paper. There are government regulators that read the blogs, and all of a sudden this big thing is reported, and a 23-year-old who's running social media outs everything before they can get their hands on it, and now they're behind the wave trying to get press is starting to call, regulators starting to call, FBI starting to call, and so bring all those pieces in that you think can help and hurt.
Yeah, my first question to your point, a whistleblower, yes, 44% of crimes are reported by whistleblowers, but we work with very large organizations, mid-sized organizations, and small ones, and I would say across the board, their whistleblower programs are deficient, regularly deficient. Some of them don't even have a program, a means by which someone can anonymously report a crime and they can track that information. So do you even have a program in place? Like, is there a means by which someone can say, hey, this is suspicious, and they may want to do that anonymously? So before you get into how you're going to investigate it or what you're going to do about it, are you going to get that call? Because if they can't call you, they may be calling SEC, the DOJ, and send somebody else. And I promise you want to know about it first. So, probably better that you receive this information or are able to do something with it before, you're forced to do something about it. And then I would say, whistleblower investigations there are some very serious legal parameters that must be followed in a whistleblower investigation. So your in-house counsel or outside counsel needs to be involved in the response. And one of the really basic ones is you can't retaliate, right? So whistleblower information, you don't keep it confidential. It gets back to someone they're talking about. That person retaliates against them in a myriad of different ways that can happen, right? Now you're going to be held liable for that. There are a number of other protections that are involved there. So I would say make sure you're looping in counsel very quickly, and whether that's, again, your general counsel's office or outhouse counsel, doesn't matter. And then, the investigation, right? So I would say we get brought in regularly on whistleblower investigations, and almost always we get brought in after some amount of work has been done, which makes sense, right? They want to see if they can wrap their arms around it first. And the biggest mistakes I see companies making, companies of all sizes, is that they, at the onset, don't think about all of the various places that evidence might exist. So take this whistleblower's allegation, pretend that it's 100% true. Okay, I'm going to either prove or disprove what they're saying, where are all of the possible places that evidence might be located. And that might be digital, it might be physical, it might be human beings, it could be a number of things, because that evidence may not exist forever. It may get destroyed by some normal processes, or it may get destroyed because someone is being nefarious. You want to make sure that you're preserving the evidence at the very onset of the investigation so that it's there if you need it, right? The last thing you want to do is be like, those emails got deleted because we only keep emails for 90 days according to our company policy, right? It's not the greatest answer when you're going to have to be speaking to this somewhere. And then the second one would be, people like to do these internally, but I always say that if there's legal, like civil or criminal or regulatory backlash, that's potentially a fallout. So if the allegations are true and the fallout is legal or regulatory, you should be hiring outside people to do this. It should be an independent investigation because it's just going to have more legitimacy, more weight. You're not going to end up being a testifying witness in the courtroom one day. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to that. So keep that in mind, what the potential law is. There's a whole lot more recommendations I would make, but for now, I think that's sufficient.
So one of the things is you guys both have had these incredible careers at Kroll and before you in your almost 4 decades combined of working in the bureau. And one of the things I thought would be interesting is I think the phrase, I thought I had seen it all. It's probably crossed your lips, and I think it's probably any of us. If you go through life long enough, everybody has that phrase every now and again. But mine thinking I've seen it all is like somebody driving down the wrong side of the street. That's like the extent of my craziness. But maybe something, Jack, and that you could give us an insight onto that, and then Shireen as well, like something you thought, okay, well this is new.
Wow, if we had a beer, we could go on for hours about this. But I'll keep mine to a couple of things that are within the confines of this conversation. Recently we saw a change in the law where companies have to report to the SEC if they are breached. But there's a clause in there that says, once it's determined it's a material breach, then they have to report it. And lawyers get hung up around that word material. Is it a material breach? What is material? It's not well defined. It's not defined in the legislation. So company A gets hacked this past summer. There basically it's been quiet. It's pretty devastating. Ransomware is up. Bad guys want their money, and they have offsite backups. They can restore. Damage is minimal. It's not out in the press. The bad guys went to the SEC and reported that we breached this company. Here's all the information that we did, and they didn't report to you. Guess what? The next phone call was from the SEC going, you got something you want to know about what happened here? And that company was back on their heels and ended up having to pay a significant fine to the SEC because they did not report. So don't underestimate bad guys. They're creative, they're great business people, they're water, they will find a way. The second one was my QR people. Talking about QR earlier. So QR codes are ubiquitous these days, and we see them everywhere. But we also have seen both in the federal government and recently in some investigations where QR codes on the table, on the menu, have built-in malware on it. So when people are scanning your QR code or at the airport, AI is starting to develop a QR code that shows this menu, but I want to have this bit of code in it as well. And so, now you're like, well, I'm not so sure I'm gonna, if I need to go to that website, maybe I'll just have to go around. So it is, criminals are more, they find ways, and QR codes, I didn't think, because I've used them, and we saw this early, and told you I was up in San Francisco right after the pandemic, nobody was touching menus, so everything was QR on the table, and it was a nation state, I'll leave that out, one company, but it was a restaurant several engineers from this particular tech company would visit, and they wanted access to these engineers' phones, and they got it because they came in the restaurant and they scanned the QR code, they didn't give them the phone. At that point, nation state has lots of treasure and time. If they wanted something, they could go after it. So that's just on the cyber part. There's all sorts of fun ones. Find me for a beer and I'll give you some also stories.
My husband makes fun of me because I refuse to scan QR codes.
Yeah.
I refuse. I'm like, they're guaranteed to have some sort of funny business in there. Thank you. I'm going to tell my husband. Yeah. So I would say the moment that I was sort of in disbelief of what I was seeing, and I feel like I've seen a lot. Again, a couple drinks in me, you can hear some fun stories. But we had one where it was a Fortune 50 company, which really big, long-standing, very well organized, very well run, very profitable company, called us because they thought that their CFO was embezzling from them. And the way that they found out that to even look at him was they Googled him. Okay? And when they Googled him, his name came up as having been previously federally convicted of embezzlement at his prior company. The bad thing was he had worked at the current company for 13 years, and they had never done a background on him. So he's ended up stealing over 25 million from them over the course of 13 years. He was quite patient. He was actually both my most favorite and my least favorite criminals. He was incredibly smart, wildly patient. He actually made money on the money that he stole, which is rare. Usually they come to your establishments and blow it. This guy had invested well because he was very financially sound. So when we seized and did forfeiture in that case, we actually were able to forfeit far more than he stole. The company was made whole. Like I said, he was a really good investor. Just wasn't his money he was investing with. So that was the biggest one for me. I mean, all they had to do, if he was there by his true name, I mean, they didn't even have to do any cyber sleuthing. Straight up just Google his name, and it was the first article that popped up. So that was fun.
I'll share something here because I do similar work. I'm not from the FBI, but I did have a client recently who was working on doing a large investment overseas and asked me to do some work for them. And I was about 3 days into the process, and the analyst that was working on it with me calls me and says, my client's name is Bill, and he says, I think you need to give Bill a call. I said, okay. So I texted him, I said, hey, can we talk at 4 o'clock today? So he gets on with his business partner, and we start talking, and I said, I found some things on this particular subject that you gave me. He's like, well, that's not how he spells his name. And I said, well, that's not how he spells his name to you, but that's how he spells his name to the Social Security Administration, because I've traced his phone records, and that's how he spells his name in Florida when he was disbarred, and that's how he spelled his name in New York when he was disbarred, and oh, is this his picture? And it was his mugshot from the Florida Department of Corrections. And it's like, oh, I guess that's the same guy. That guy looked familiar because they had met with him, and they were getting ready to invest a lot of money into this trust. He was the trustee of this large trust and was doing a real estate deal. And I said, well, and so he's on the phone, we're on a Zoom call, and he's scratching his head, his business partner is scratching his head. And the guy who I worked with was going through it, and he just kept reading things, and it was like a dossier, and he kept saying, well, this is colorful, and this is interesting, and this, I can't believe this happened, and you just don't know. So I think that, having the hairy eyeball is, you don't ever want to be discouraging. Obviously we all want to make money, we all want to bring in revenue, but having a healthy skepticism isn't necessarily a bad thing. And then I started getting a reputation in the company as somebody who's finding all the strange ones. I've had a few in my career, but that one was, I stopped doing the work, and they said, well, how much do I have to pay you? I said, well, what are you talking about? We don't need you to do anything. How far along are you in the project? And I said, I don't know, 75%. Like, can I pay you 75% because I'm killing the deal? And the guy was literally getting on a plane to go to Switzerland to meet with these people and stopped the whole thing. And I had found something else for him where I found that the same client, one of his trustees was enchanting rich widows in London. And it found a widow. Yeah, so you just, it's interesting because I know in the businesses that you guys are in, it's like you find, there's so many different walks of life that come through, but sometimes they look like Jack here. And they, and behind that nice friendly smile is something that you didn't expect. One of the other questions I wanted to talk about here was, when you go to a job interview and they say, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I want you to go back 5 years. So you guys were both in the bureau. You left. And what has changed? If you could have prognosticated 5 years ago as to what's going on now, what are you most surprised about? And then let's do, that's part one of the question. And then part two is, if you're going to look at your crystal ball, run the odds 5 years from now, what do you think, where do you think we're going to be sitting and having these types of conversations in the world of cyber and fraud and financial crime?
I can think, let's go back a few years, and again, I started way early with the Bureau as a cyber agent, and I continue to see, this progress. And 5 years ago, even less, the Internet of Things was not as significant as it is now. If you go to your home router, maybe you have your computer on the network, and that was it. Now, think about your home right now. What do you have on your home router, which is your thermostat, maybe some lights? How about your electric car? How about everything, your smart TV? There are now toaster ovens and crock pots that are now internet enabled. So the threat landscape that is out there, especially in this field, as I walk through the floor, everything is connected and everything has silicon chips in it. So bad guys are going to figure out ways to get there. It goes back to the Dillinger days. Why did you rob a bank? Because that's where the money is. And that's where you're seeing bad guys going after hospitals, they're going after casinos, because that's where the money is. That's where they know they're going to pay. So the attack landscape 5 years ago was not what it is now. We've seen hospitals, when they put on an MRI machine, IT connects it up. They know it's on the network, but who's updating the firmware on that MRI? What's normal behavior for that machine? We've seen attack vectors come in from MRI machines that get into the overall hospital network. So what surprised me in the last 5 years is just the explosion of what is out there as a vector for bad guys to get into. And I think in the next 5 years, it's going to continue to go that way with AI and everything, with quantum computing getting into everything. It's just going to be a challenge that it's got to be holistic. It's got to be people, it's got to be technology, it's got to be executives, it's got to be government regulators and investigators kind of all working together to bad guys that day, because they will find a way.
Wasn't the WannaCry thing like an attack sitting in a hospital of like kind of passive computers that people never thought about, and then all of a sudden it's like another Wednesday now.
It is. WannaCry was something I could, again, over here we can talk to you a little bit more about. But there, to kind of show you the things that we get in that make you hold your breath with an insider threat at a pharmaceutical company, a drug company that fills prescriptions. He was getting fired. He knew he was getting fired. He created what's called a logic bomb within the network. And it did everything a bomb does. It detonates, it goes off, it takes out data. And if you think about the drug interaction, if you have cardiac medicine or diabetes medicine, when they're filling scripts, that's what they'll look say, oh wait, you can't have that. There's an indication of that. This guy decided to set off a logic bomb and destroy that capability for this company. And they had no idea how to fill prescriptions. So it's just little things like that our life is just kind of wrapped around technology. It's going to continue to be that way.
It still feels so siloed. In the earlier talk today, they were talking about, problem gamblers and how the information isn't being as shared. And I think that, the defenses that people would put up around the critical IP within the casino world, if they found an opportunity in one that, that means it's probably replicatable, across the landscape.
Absolutely. These criminals and organizations, they do that. They fall over a crack sometimes, and they're like, oh, that worked. Let me try that again. And they'll end up kind of dialing that in and perfecting that, and then possibly selling that capability. That's exactly what we see in ransomware. It is someone perfecting some type of a code, some type of technology, and they're out there selling it now. So it's a whole different ecosystem. 5 years ago, Shireen.
5 years ago, Shireen, what's it surprised 5 years ago, Shireen, today?
I would think I'm going to be a little esoteric. I think it's the the willful disregard or like the devolution of truth, like the absolute disregard for any kind of truth, shocks me still to this day. I mean, I've worked on several matters where, you know, we'll call it fake news just because it's a fun word to use, where fake news has, you know, spread like wildfire, I can't say the word, wildfire. And it starts with, you know, what you would think where it's, you know, bots and or like groups of people in some foreign country, but it becomes organic, it's adopted by real users and then propagated by those real users, and it leads to real world things like violence, and other terrible things, and I won't get into any of the details. But the fact that in today's day and age, I mean, you get, what, 5 to 15 seconds of someone's time, and then they believe what they read, they do absolutely no independent research, and then they espouse that sudden belief that they hold to be true to others, right? And that's how it spreads. And I think 5 years ago even, I don't think I would have believed you if you would have told me that would be the world that we live in today. And yeah.
So if I asked you that question in 5 years from now, what do you think you're going to be facing?
You know, the whole conversation y'all had about like augmented reality and virtual reality and all this. Again, I don't even scan QR codes. I'm like a dinosaur when it comes to technology for a good reason. But I can't help but think that the sort of convergence of that and generative AI is sort of a frightening proposition, because I think of it from a criminal angle, right? And how criminals are going to be able to use those things to not just steal money, not just commit crimes, but to influence people in certain directions. I mean, if you thought it was your best friend, or you had this experience that was so real, it was coming from someone that you valued and trusted, like what kinds of things were you going to be putting in people's brains and getting people to do? Like, it's just sort of, I go in a dark place when I think about that. So I think that I don't know where that's going to head, but I don't see it going anywhere but super fast down the train tracks, right? So I don't know where we'll be in 5 years, but hopefully I won't be talking about that.
Well, my hope from that conversation is that we have the opportunity to still be creative, and people still have the opportunity to expand the footprint and to bring more customers into your floor and to bring more excitement into the landscape of the casino and the esports. But at the same time, you know, we don't want to ever squelch the creativity. It's just being mindful that that's just one more area that you need to still have everything as beautiful and as exciting as it possibly can. But, you know, sort of the whole adage that your mother tells you when you start dating, like trust but verify, that kind of a thing. And just thinking like, this is something, every time you want to do something else, unfortunately, you have to think about what else could potentially happen. And just being aware of it and taking the steps necessary. So there's almost like 70 tribal casinos in California. And so if we were in honor of our hosts here at the Isle of Caliente, which is a beautiful property, you know, if you were to have, you know, a 2-minute audience with the board of directors and any one of those, and the gentleman here earlier, Victor, you know, having a conversation with them, just giving them a little bit of advice, of how to stay, you know, protect their business, and also to make sure that the folks that your ex-profession don't come walking through the door. What would be 1 or 2 things you'd offer to them?
You know, from my standpoint, we do have a lot of conversations with boards of directors, and it deals with cybersecurity, and it can go deep and ugly quick on patching and things. It doesn't need to be deep and ugly for boards or employees. It is, you need to be a Rosetta Stone, and we talk to boards all the time to make sure that they understand they're part of this. Governments are requiring boards of directors to have cybersecurity professionals associated with them now. So it really is, you know, I'm pretty handy around the house, but I don't hang drywall because I can't take. And I'm going to bring somebody in that really knows how to tape and can make that the best they can. It's the same thing with some of the work we do. Don't go it alone. There are people out there who do this for a living, people that do it for a living. They rinse and repeat it. They see things all the time. The beauty of whole cyber, we have threat intelligence. So all of the incident responses that all these breaches that we go after every year kind of gets fed back into the grinder, and that starts to inform threat intelligence people, what's out there. We talk to our customers about that. So it really is it's an iterative process. And that's what we really want to help people with. Don't go it alone. There are people out there and companies out there that are really exceptionally good at that. I can tell you from a cyber standpoint that there's a lot of government DNA in Kroll, whether you like that or not. But the people that work cyber investigations within Kroll are predominantly retired FBI, Secret Service, Interpol, Europol. So it's not just some engineer that theoretically knows what this does. It's people that have been there against nation states and some of the best cyber hackers out there. So don't go it alone. Take the phone call.
Same question for you, Sri. You have 5 minutes with the board at any one of these wonderful establishments across California. What would you say to them?
Yes, I think I agree with what you said, but I would say knowledge is power, right? So you'd be surprised at how much data you have at your fingertips and how much the ability to have more knowledge you have already. You're already collecting it for various different reasons. And what we find is that almost always companies, because they've grown over time, that where they house that data and where they're reviewing that data and how they're using that data are for very disparate purposes, right? And then they're not aggregating it, they're not looking at it holistically, and so they're missing the whole picture. And so I would say, for any sizable organization, even small ones, it's wrapping your hands around the information that you already have so that you can use that knowledge to figure out where your gaps are, where you're strong, right? You don't want to be spending time and money where you're already strong, you're already doing a good job, right? Spend the time and money where you have the weaknesses and where your gaps are and where you're most vulnerable. And then the second thing would be your people, right? Like, you can be the most sophisticated hacker on the face of the planet, but if you can just walk in the front door, you know what I mean? Like when I think about some of the cyber attacks that have happened recently, they happen through social engineering. You pick up the phone, you make friends with someone, you get all the information you need. I don't even hack anything. I now have credentials, I can just simply log in. So training your people to be a really great first line of defense, I think, is essential. And in our world today, I'm not sure. I think some organizations do that really, really well, and others maybe don't put as much prepared on it. So those would be my 2 things. Wrap your hands around the data you already have, use your knowledge, make it powerful, right? And then your people, your best asset, and also, probably your weakest link in the organization, right? Make sure that they're empowered and trained to do a fabulous job to protect you.
Keep in mind, I'm not sure if it's public knowledge, but the MGM hit last summer started with a phone call. It was socially engineered, that they got credentials and they got into the system. It started with somebody picking up the phone with a convincing script, and they got in and they put MGM on the knees for a week.
Yeah, that probably wasn't the first person they got a hold of, so they were just ping-ponging around until
they had a good shtick, and they figured it out. Somebody finally gave them provision them, and then they have it.
And I think about the bad actors, they're extremely disciplined. And you have to be as fortified and 10 times more disciplined because they, set their sight on something and they're going to keep charging ahead until they find it because that's where the money is.
Absolutely.
So we are keeping you guys from a cocktail or from a mixer, but if there's any questions, you're certainly welcome to pose them or, find us. We're around, but, we are delighted to have this conversation and hopefully you learn a little bit more about our organization. We're really proud of the work that we do, and hopefully you found this to be really informative and might be even more interesting over a glass of wine or a glass of beer.
Thank you so much. So the rest of the day today, thank you guys so much. I appreciate that very much. The rest of the day today is as follows. I just want to mention one thing before